We're back in the studio, and I'm joined by my two friends from the no longer Europe. my two Brexit friends, Daniel, Russ. Russ, you already were here a minute ago, but we accidentally invited you again, so you get to introduce yourself last. Daniel, you're the host of the Measurepod. I think 100 and something episodes of analytics nerdism online. Right?
For sure, yeah. I'd lost count, I think. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. Russ, you're founder of Ringside, co-founder of Ringside. One of your more smarter founders is also at the event this year. And we're going to talk about attribution. You can see that that's the title. So we are going to discuss the age-old problem of attributing value to whatever it is we're trying to do as a marketing team. Now, you're in this from the vendor perspective, but before that, actually, I think you guys worked together in a long...
There was overlap.
A long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah, but you know, you help companies try to attribute our messy reality. You also do that in your day-to-day job, trying to help your clients figure out how to attribute value.
Yeah.
My first question, is it all a scam? Is it all fake? Is it useful? Where are we at?
There's lots of questions. Where do you want to start?
How useful is attribution? On a scale of 1 to 10, how important is attribution? Russ, I'll start with you.
It's 10, but that's because the definition of attribution is if you're doing last touch, you're doing attribution. You've just made a conscious decision to use the model that has become the default for the majority of marketing activity. So attribution is more a concept rather than a formula or some algorithm. Like the main thing that we try to speak to clients about, and I've been saying the same stuff for like a decade now, is it's about your understanding of performance. So it's for that brand, no matter what model you use, how you do the calculations, how smart it is, whether it's machine learning, whether it's something in Excel, the same number comes out at the end. You're not making more money by doing well, unless your maths is terrible. You're not going to make any more money. You're not making any more conversions or sales. So to answer your question is, attribution is actually more of the way you think about how you define success and what factors you want to consider as part of that conversation.
I'm going to say a 9 to be different. I think it's important. It's not a hoax, but exactly as you said, I'll start exactly the same way if someone asks me that. It's like, you're doing it already. And I think much like when people say AI, they mean generative AI. I think when you say attribution, you probably mean like data-driven or machine learning or some kind of algorithmic approach to attribution rather than like a standard rules-based, like last touch, last click, like you mentioned. So I think it's one of those things like people, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, right? The Dunning-Kruger effect. And I think it's that I don't want to know, like I'm already using it. Like I just want my numbers. And if you ask 20 people what attribution is, you're going to get 20 results. And you've got a million models that can happen. And so it's overwhelming. And so when we talk about attribution, it's really, really bloody important because you want to answer the question of like, how well have I done in X? But often that's like, as soon as you start going into the maths and the kind of technicalities of it, people then start pulling back. So yeah, I think it's bloody important.
And just to add to that as well, I think the key thing that I think we'll probably align very well on here is we're talking about an independent view of attributed performance. That's when we're talking about attribution. That's what we're saying is the value add for any brand is when you can say, here is a view of the world that is the best representation of the attributed performance. What individual vendors are doing when they have, well, we've got an attribution model in Google Ads, we've got an attribution model in Meta, we've got an attribution model in our affiliate platform, where they're nuanced to only include a small part of the vision that is the entire marketing mix. That isn't attribution. That is them trying to attribute value to their activity, and in the I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on, they are going to attribute more than they're probably worth.
Yeah.
And so when we're chatting about attribution, and please correct me if I'm speaking for you incorrectly, but like we're talking about having a view that is as much of the data across all of the channels that we can, and that's what we're trying to take into consideration to give the best version of the truth.
So I will stop you because I think I kind of agree, and I think the independence is really important, right? When we're doing this to like the next level, but like the way I always kind of describe attribution modeling, because you're right, there's 1,000 models in 1,000 platforms, is like it's a lens. It's a lens you put on top of your data, and it tells a story based on the rules that are applied. So last click tells a story. It might not be a good story if you're looking at prospect marketing, right? Prospecting. You look at first touch attribution, that's not going to be very good for, direct response stuff. And so the way I see attribution modeling, and it's all attribution modeling. The thing is there's no wrong way of doing it. There are better and less good ways of doing it, but there's no perfect model and there's no wrong model. They're all somewhere in the middle. And so you build up this narrative you can tell of your marketing, your user behavior and things like that by looking across them, understanding it so that you can use it for the analysis, right? Analysis is turning data into insights, right? Taking some numbers and finding out what that means, what we do with it. And one of those tools within our tool belt is an attribution model. It's a lens, it's a perspective. So I don't think there is an absolute truth. You just got to pick them all.
Play a game with you guys. I am the marketing manager, CMO of a $100 million ad spend budget, marketing budget, whatever you want to call it. And currently, all my spend is in Google Ads. Now, we're not going to debate whether that's good or not, but that is the case. How important is attribution to me right now? Scale 1 to 10.
The question isn't the channel mix or the ad spend. I think it's important, but it's going to be about how many touches in that journey exist. If you're selling low ticket value items on like Amazon.com, right? Then there's no point because people are going to decide to buy it and buy, and it's like one touch journeys, and that you don't need to think about.
You're selling batteries online.
Yeah. If you're selling cruises, right? 10, 20,000 euro cruises, and you're still only bidding in Google Ads, like that's going to be more relevant because people are going to get to and from you in different ways, maybe different campaigns, maybe organic as well, right? So you're not spending there. So I think that's the question to ask. But that's quite easily seen in the data, right? You can see with a quick bit of analysis, you can see, the average touch points to convert, and then you can make an educated guess of like, do I go down this rabbit hole or do I not, right?
Just to take that a bit further as well, the view on a lot of things in analytics has come from a lens of what GA can do and what people have used to being able to do within Google Analytics. And this is where people who use Adobe sort of laugh at the people who just use GA and go, I could have been able to do this stuff for years. And attribution's the same as that, because when you're talking about the channel being paid search or just Google, but actually, if you have an attribution model that looks at what happens within the visits themselves, you want to look at keyword level data. I want to know the attributed relationship between keywords throughout the conversion funnel. So when there are multiple touch points, you should, in that scenario, have campaigns that are focused at top of funnel, middle and lower funnel. So it's not about reattributing the value towards just another channel. It's within every single interaction. So you would want to understand the role that certain campaigns have further up in the funnel, into the middle of funnel and lower. Yeah. And then the bigger thing as well is within the logic you build into that, it shouldn't just be based on the fact that someone's visited the website. It actually should be, what did they do when they visited, when the context was delivered? So when they clicked on that ad, when they did that search, when they received that email, there is some context being added to that relationship between the brand and the user. And when they arrived at your website or came into your app, what they do then is defined by that context at that time. So the value of that interaction should be what they do, not just the keyword that they clicked on. That's just the context building. What we want to know is, did they view many products? Did they add items to their basket? And obviously, e-com example, but or did they bounce? And therefore, what the context that they had when they clicked on that ad, well, that wasn't what they expected at that time. So it's not that shouldn't be valued the same as the person who clicked on something different and did loads of stuff on the website that you want them to do that leads towards success. And so it's way more complicated than just talking about channels and that type of activity.
I agree, but I'm gonna take the other side. So from a budget allocator's perspective, right? The person in the chair with the $100 million budget who gets told, I need a certain return, right? They're looking at how will I allocate this budget? To what extent is attribution a tool to help you better allocate budget? Or is it a tool to, after the fact, justify what you've spent? Like, how do we view this?
It can kind of tell the story you want to tell, right? Remember, there's infinite attribution models you can use. So in this scenario, if you need to justify budget for one channel, right, you can go justify it, right?
Yeah.
So there's an element there where it's like, okay, but if you want this perspective of it, the thing about attribution modeling, again, depends on the sales cycle. Like if you're selling something that takes 9 months to convert, you're going to have to look over 9 months ago to get the kind of fullest picture of all the kind of activity and the conversions and the activity you ran, has it finally converted? So it is a historic looking tool. It's a kind of back in time, how did we do if we were to do it again, right? So it's less relevant, not that it's not useful, it's less relevant for kind of always on campaigns. But if I'm doing like a Black Friday campaign, I can go back last year, I can see that. Your example is still hard because you've got one channel. And so if you're looking at budgeting,
It's
then
on purpose hard.
Yeah. But like within that, like, I don't know. I think, listen to your marketing guys.
What I'm trying to hint at a little bit is like, people tend to use analytics to, after the fact, justify what they've done, where I feel like we should move more towards wargaming. What can we do with this 100 million budget, and use attribution as a tool to kind of play around with what could we do, what could we allocate differently, and how would that play out?
Well, the biggest thing here is you're talking about allocating, and the assumption is that you're talking about allocating to a channel. But in a lot of the scenarios, attributed data is trying to give you a better understanding of the value of activity. So in that scenario where you've only got one channel, which is mental, but in that scenario, your budget allocation shouldn't just be to a channel, it should be to a segment of customers. So the attribution model will give you, this is the value that you're seeing from your top of funnel campaigns within that channel. Here is the value for these middle of funnel, and here is your value for the lower funnel. And in a scenario where you didn't have an attribution model and you just had last click, all of your budget allocation would be to the lower funnel activity, because your blended CPA is the wrong metric to be using to have that attribution model, the lack of attribution model to do that distribution of cost.
Yeah.
So what you would want to have is a model that said, this top of funnel activity is driving incremental value. Here is the distribution that we're seeing, and therefore this is how you can better distribute that budget. So it can be done well in advance because you're using historical context and making the broad assumption, like you do in any forecasting or budgetary, that there will be a similar reaction to an input.
Can I argue a point? But I don't think attribution modeling does incremental value measurement. Like you can't look and say this was incremental. You can say, if I was to look at all these touch points and distribute the total value across the total visible things, then you will, right? That's the process. But it's not answering the question of saying, if I didn't run the activity, would it have happened anyway? And so this is where attribution does its job really well, which is historical looking, and it's a great data set for training models and predicting forward, and you can play that war game. But the value here, and I think this is where my perspective has changed over the years when I was purely attribution to maybe now, is like, it's a tool, like I say, in the tool belt of marketers or marketing analytics, it's a tool. And then we've got, okay, if we're doing, if not in your example, but if it was a multi-channel approach to marketing with a lot of money, maybe media mix modeling would be a better approach for looking at overall budget adjustments and understanding influence. But the best thing is the incrementality testing, and within the campaigns itself, whether it's geo-based or RCTs, like randomized control trials, like that is the way to look at incrementality. But they're not one supersedes the other. Like they're all used in combination, and they're doing different things.
Yeah.
And in isolation, one on its own doesn't tell you what you need to do as a marketer with that much money to spend. So my advice would be, yeah, we can look back and we can see that, but there's always a better way of doing it. And I think combining these techniques, but it might not be relevant. I think the interesting thing about talking about all this stuff is like we're talking hypotheticals, and in your case, it's like, well, maybe it doesn't work. Like we talk about like machine learning models. Like, okay, if there's not enough consistency in the data, then it's not ever going to be able to learn, and so it doesn't work for you, right? So data-driven attribution, machine learning attribution doesn't work for you, but it does for someone else.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard to talk in generals.
I think, so you highlight one interesting point that I also want to dive into, and I think that's a good point to do that right now. So when we're talking attribution, and the way we've been talking about it up until this point is very much through the lens of deterministic measurement, right? So we're able to measure everything in high enough data quality to make sense of it all. If we throw into the mix anonymization of data or missing data because of privacy regulation or because of privacy technology or because of whatever, or just mixed customer journeys across mobile apps and that are not connected and people are not logged in, right? To what extent, is there a diminishing return of like deterministic attribution? Is there a point where a brand should only start looking at media mix modeling kind of solutions, or is it always a mix? Or what are your takes on that?
I think you kind of need to make sure that you understand your data quality as much as you can ever understand the level of data integrity and quality that you have. That's probably the first thing. Like, you need to know what you know. You're never going to know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
So a big part of this is just going in and with your eyes open to go, this is the sort of the playground that we're in, and this is the data we have available. I think any brand that's investing significantly into non-trackable activity, TV,
Outdoor
not connected
media.
TV, but because you can do some stuff there, but especially with outdoor, print, etc., where it's nowhere near as trackable as the digital space is, then there is a role for media mix modeling for sure, combined with a sort of a machine learned attribution model to help with the digital space where we have a lot more information. And again, going back to the sort of the point that we both made, first question is, the whole principle of this isn't to try to track every single point and every single data point. It's more to make better decisions. If we can make smarter decisions with this data, then we're winning and we're pointing in the better direction than we were the day before. And so if you combine media mix modeling with anything deterministic, then you're in a better place than you were when you were just making decisions based on your thoughts and what you think was happening.
Yeah, having an awesome model with no decision is less good than having a rubbish model with some decision, right?
Yeah.
I think this, again, through the kind of the years of talking about attribution and kind of trying to teach it and explain it to marketers, there's an element where it's like often the simpler the model, the happier we are to go and start running with it. If we're continuously navel gazing and talking about the prediction methodologies and the technical aspects and the implementation and the data and volume, then we're never going to use it. We're never going to go forward with it. We're never going to move on and start using it for what the value it brings in is. So for me, I always just pick a point that is understandable, easily explainable, and okay. But I think if you're aware of what attribution modeling is, like, you can use last click and make decisions, but not blindly, right? Like, I know the limitations of this model and I can make the decisions knowing that. It's like having a small print on a contract, like I can read into it. So like, yeah, there is an element there where it's just like, just use it, pick one and use it, I'll be happy. There's always the next phase, there's always the next thing we can do.
I think if you skip back to 5 years ago when we started Ringside, every time that we were talking to someone about attribution, they were asking questions about the calculation and the model. And it took a while for us to treat them differently and have to say, well, you don't have to worry about that. Look, we've built this model. It's better than the last click because it's taking into consideration everything else. And we've now completely passed that. And it's, if you want to use our attribution model, the numbers are there. That's the number. We don't have to explain it. And we're not getting asked those questions anymore. Because I think like businesses are getting more aware that there is a such thing as attribution, and it's not that they have to select a model anymore.
Yeah.
And so here is a machine learning model, and the buzzword sells that, and then they go, we're just going to use the attributed revenue numbers, the attributed ROAS, the attributed MOAS numbers. That's their number of truth that they're happy to use now, and they're just not using last click anymore. Yep. And I think that that's probably one of the biggest changes for me, is that I used to spend so much time explaining the different models, and now it's just kind of an inherent trust of this number should be better than what we had before. So we're going to use that attributed number now.
I think that is also a function of industry maturity, right? Like as more either analysts or marketers that kind of understands analytics start working at companies, you see that the general, like people are less scared of, hey, the number changed, right? They kind of understand why the number changed. And people are very aware that every platform will attribute as much as possible to themselves, right? Greedy modeling. And that is now just accepted to be, that's just how the world works. So I guess that's the good point, right? Like we're not entirely past. We still have to explain sometimes, but we're ahead on the having to explain the number.
Do you think, though, I'm throwing a question back to you, but do you think that's because we as an industry are beyond that because we understand it, or because of frustration and kind of ignorance, and then technologies like Google Analytics removing attribution models to take it away as part of the conversation? So now there's, you go into Google Ads and it's auto data-driven, their model, don't ask questions, hard to do it. So there's an element there, which I get, there's the people like us talking about this. I think we're kind of, we've been talking about this for over 10 years, right? But then there's other people that like, it's not even part of their remit or their visual kind of like marketing stuff. And I think that's maybe dangerous in a different way, because like, don't ask questions, the marketing platform will do it for you.
Well, it definitely plays a role. I like to think positively of our industry. So I think there's definitely been a shift over the years. Like if I just look at our clients, there's more smart analytics people or analytics-minded people working at the client side. There's just more talent available there's more people going to measure camps. There's more people who understand the concept of attribution modeling who are working both, not only agency side, also client side. So I think in general, there's more people able to explain the concept, at least at a basic level, internally. So, yeah.
But there's naivety to that, though, right? Because I would put money on the fact that if you asked all the people who actually are in charge of the Google Ads accounts that are on data-driven attribution to explain how that works, I would say 95% of people wouldn't actually be able to tell you accurately what's taken into consideration. Does it include organic search visits?
Does Google know how it works?
Yeah. No, well, I was going to say 95% of Google staff don't know.
Probably. And so like, and this comes back to, there is inherent trust in certain areas, and then you get to a knowledge level where you're like, oh, okay, well, I know that doesn't include this now.
Yeah.
And then that shift happens of going, well, what should I trust now? Like, how can I believe the numbers that are in Meta when it's saying it made more revenue yesterday than I actually made?
So I think this is why my thinking on this is now, there is no truth, right? There are lenses, perspectives, opinions, right? Each of these is an opinion on what happened. They're all right. They're all technically doing what they do.
Meta is very wrong all the time.
assuming the same numbers go in, your tracking's not broken or anything like that. Like the modeling is just it's a model. It's a lens, right? And so they're all right. They're all correct, right? And I think these are just opinions. And if you think of it as like, there isn't like one holy grail, there's not one thing. Like, I think there needs to be a common agreed internal understanding of which one do we use when we need to do a pie chart of revenue by marketing channel, right? Of course. But if we think of them all as opinions, it changes the way I and the people I work with think about it. And so we're not chasing for the correct one.
I think that's a good point. And as you said that, I was like, okay, so actually it is our and I'm saying us as industry kind of, maybe also a little bit our responsibility to abstract away the complexity and to prioritize action, right? So we can have eternal discussions about the perfect attribution model, right? And we will never find it.
And we have for over 10 years.
But so our job kind of is pick something good enough to do better today than we did yesterday, right? Like that. If you really simplify it, like we just need something to create better campaigns, allocate our money in a smarter way than we did yesterday. And as long as that's the case, then we're moving forward.
Pick something.
Yeah.
That's the biggest part of that.
So that's the answer to our discussion. Just pick something.
Yeah, like, well, this is, so as much, I use truth as the descriptor for the number that people are going to put their trust in, because that's what we're actually talking about here, is that the brand is saying, this is the number that we're going to use as the success. And it should be, the total should be the actual amount of money, amount of conversions that brand's had. And so once you have that number correct, the distribution, however what you're trying to distribute it to, as long as it adds up to that total, you just have to make sure that you make a decision and everyone's on the same page. And therefore that becomes synonymous with the truth that you're managing activity to. Like, there is never going to be the perfect model. You don't know that someone's mum recommended that product and that's the reason why they typed in that brand term, and you can't associate that within the model. But the best version of what the decision that you make as a business, you're going to use these numbers from now on. This is how we're going to understand success. The biggest thing is making sure that everyone's on the same page and everyone's using those same numbers, so you don't end up with one team using one model, one team using another model. And we go back to how that was 10 years ago, where the display team was using first click, the paid search team was using last click, the SEO team was trying to do some weighted little number because they weren't at the end of the journey as much as they wanted to be. Like, consistency is what we need to play here, and making sure that the brand actually makes a decision to say, here's a better view that we consider better than where we were previously, and therefore we can understand the direction we need to go.
Yeah. I think, from my perspective, would you argue that machine learning is on average going to yield a better result than any custom model?
No. No.
You're taking no, or you're taking a yes? What I'm trying to hint at is, with there's now a bunch of out of the box machine learning in every tool, right? In every analytics tool.
Yep.
And then you could also construct your own logic. What should a company, like if a company is like, okay, we're going to do attribution modeling better tomorrow, right? As we just suggested, just do something. Should they go for machine learning out of the box, data driven, or should they go with something that they can internally explain?
Oh, so that's a different question. I want to agree. I want to say yes, you could go with that. But is it better? No. Like,
okay, yeah, better is the wrong terminology.
Like, machine learning, by definition of that, it will look at how successful it's been towards the thing you've defined as success. It will get better at the weightings in the model towards that. So yes, machine learning will always be better than having any static weighting, because as long as you've defined success correctly, the machine learning will get smarter over time and also isn't so sort of static in its calculations.
Yes.
So, but I don't think that's the question that businesses should be worried about. Like, the bigger thing for me is, forget about the maths, forget about model choices. You end up with some numbers that you believe in, and then make sure that you have the capabilities internally to question everything at every granularity to make smarter decisions down the line. I think we spend so much time, and I've wasted so many years of my life talking about the model and the calculations and what's included and what's not included, when what actually ends up happening is that we should be talking about new versus existing customers, different customer segments, next best product based on how you acquire that customer, or how much you should be investing in generating a new customer who buys through discount. What's the lifetime value of those people? And all of those, the maths behind those types of questions, the attributed performance is just part of that conversation. And so what I would say is we need to shift the focus away from like the maths behind it and more the use cases of how we actually get value from this new truth, and I'm using that on purpose just to pee you off a little bit, but like this new truth that we're going to run the business through, this lens, there you go, this lens that we're providing. What can we do with it? And that for me is the real value of attribution, is that has enabled businesses to know what direction they should be going in, and being able to answer so many more types of questions around the full customer journey. Because that's the main thing for attribution, is we know more about the customers. So let's move the conversation to what can we get from the value of this now that we have that data, because it doesn't really matter what model you use as long as it's better than what you had before. It's a long answer to not your question.
Very good.
True political answer.
Let's say I'm listening to this, I'm now very much convinced that I should do attribution
Really?
in a better way, the best way, the true lens. Is there a mistake I can make? Like, what's the biggest risk of me changing how I do attribution?
I don't think there is. Things change all the time. I mean, the whole concept of machine learning is that it's always learning and changing, right? So your methodology is changing. And so you change to get better. You've got to. And so, yeah, change it. Why not? I mean, like I say, the key thing is not to, say, navel gaze, like not to keep blaming the tools, right? You know, a good workman never blames their tools, right? It's the same thing.
So let's assume currently I have a very average spend spread across 6 channels, and we currently use last click, just for the sake of argument, right? And now we're going to switch to data-driven. How should I go about redistributing based on what I learned?
The answer to your question previously is stop. Don't ever stop asking questions. Because that's the thing, is that if you go, cool, we're going to do some new maths, here's the new output, done. I don't need to worry about it anymore because that number is better than this number over here. It's all about asking the questions of that data. One, are we taking, like, the biggest thing is, are we taking into consideration within whatever logic you want to use as much as we can that's not limiting the ability for us to get the number at the end? So are we seeing as much of the picture as we can, and are we limiting ourselves by not doing that? So, and this is where I see people and they say we're using data-driven something, but they're not including their direct or organic visits. And you're like, okay, well, know that, because if you are limited, whether that be financial because you can't afford to use a platform that you have to pay for to do this, and you need to know where your limitations are and what impact that would have on the view of the world that you have then. If you are seeing that, okay, we've taken as much as we can into consideration, you need to make sure that you understand what's being taken into consideration, and therefore what questions and answers you can generate once you have that ability.
An exercise you can do is put it into your tool of choice, spreadsheet, whatever, and you get your marketing channels or whatever granularity you need, and you work out your ROI, your CPA, your conversion rates, right? And you get that with your current model. Let's say that's last click. Do that again next to it with your new model you've picked, machine learning, data-driven, first click, whatever it happens to be, and you've got yourself a side-by-side comparison. And you can be like, okay, if I just had this, if I had the blinders on and I was just doing this, what decision would I make about my budgets, right? Was this ROI big enough? Was the MOAS or the ROAS good enough? But if I look over here, is that the same decision, right? Would I have changed that decision? And this is a good exercise you can do to see, okay, how does that change things? And just seeing them side by side is really interesting. And this is why I call them lenses, opinions, because you could do that 3-4 different times. You can ask yourself that question. And I think one of the first things we talked about was about whether it's relevant, right? If the answer to that is no, or it's something stupid like no, we're a big company, old school, and the budgets are set and we can't change them, can't possibly change them. They're locked in for 5 years, right? Then again, it's almost just an academic exercise that it doesn't change anything. But just go ask yourself that question, like, would I be happy to get that ROI again? Or if I look at it this way, is that a different decision? But that's the best way. Put it side by side and see if play the game. See if that would change anything.
Yeah. And then let's say it tells me that I should reallocate my 20 million of PPC to display, right? Just to go overboard. What would be the advice? Like, just YOLO, or what's the approach here? How we're gonna handle that?
Well, it's not. Sorry, it's jumping in, but it's not always about the data says this, so we do that. There's always going to be politics and people at play in this as well. And one of my biggest failures when I was new in attribution modeling is I went to a client and I was like, the data says this. You should treble your investment in email. And they're like, well, we can't. Like, we can't. How do we treble our investment in email? And they're like, oh yeah, now you say it makes sense. And so there is going to be an element there where, or like, for example,
buy more direct.
Yeah.
Buy more direct traffic. Amazing.
Or the other good example is like brand PPC, right? And it's like, it's not incremental, right? Let's say we get that. And it's like, but there's an element where the brand wants to control the top spot with their messaging. It's easier to change the narrative than it is on an organic result. And so it's a sunk cost. It's a cost they're happy to lose because they control a place, a narrative, a thing. And so you have to get behind those before you start adjusting budgets, before you start YOLOing, right? This is the thing. So if you understand that aspect, you can YOLO the rest of it. But there's always going to be an element of like, maybe there's like 50% of that PPC spend that has to stay on and it's written off. And then you can take the 50% and YOLO.
Well, the biggest thing with that as well, you need to know what levers you have available to you. So like the brand PPC one is a classic example of there's a lot of opportunity in that space, but you already are at a very high impression share. So you can't buy in people doing searches and drive more impressions. So there are cost efficiencies. So there's a cost efficiency curve for every single campaign based on the seasonality at that time. So the whole point of this coming back to, one, you need to go more granular with the data, and you can go down to keyword or campaign level. You can go down to landing pages by device. You have at your fingertips more data than you ever have. And then combined by that, better understand customers and what they're doing and what they're telling you by their behavior. Because that is one of the key things that you get from having attribution through the full journey, is that visit in isolation is made up of many different things that customers telling you, and you can see what they did in previous visits through that journey and the value of those previous visits. And that's the bit that is kind of lost in the aggregate, and what we need to move away from is blended CPAs and the overall, this is our overall conversion rate. We need to understand more about the role of marketing throughout that entire journey.
Guys, I feel like we can continue this conversation forever. Maybe we will tonight, but I want to thank you both for sharing your thoughts on attribution. And hopefully this was an enjoyable talk for the people watching. Enjoy Super Week, and
yeah, and to you.
Cheers, Rick.
See you. Bye-bye.